Prime Minister Justin Trudeau called it this country's collective shame, how gay and lesbian Canadians were treated for decades. And so he stood in the House and apologized for the actions previous governments took against them simply because of their sexuality. It was a moment that was historic and moving.
Over our history, laws, policies enacted by the government led to the legitimization of much more than inequality. They legitimized hatred and violence and brought shame to those targeted. The state orchestrated a culture of stigma and fear around LGBTQ2 communities, and in doing so, destroyed people's lives. It is with shame and sorrow and deep regret for the things we have done that I stand here today and say, we were wrong, we apologize, I am sorry, we are sorry.
The apology was supported by all parties, although some Conservative MPs did not attend. Ottawa also introduced legislation to wipe out the criminal records of those who were convicted of consensual same-sex activity, and the government settled a lawsuit with those in the public service, the military, and the RCMP in the Cold War era who were fired for being gay. $110 million has now been set aside to compensate those whose careers were sidelined. Dozens of people who were wronged by government policy were invited to Parliament Hill. We caught up with one man who traveled across the country to hear the government say sorry.
I was the head of a department in a destroyer. I was a naval lieutenant.
Frank Letourneau's story isn't an uncommon one. A rising star in the Royal Canadian Navy, at just 26 years old, he led a team of 40 sailors aboard the HMCS Saguenay. Here he is in 1968, speaking to Radio-Canada. 2 years later, Letourneau's career abruptly ended when he was confronted by his superiors.
I'd been summoned to the military police office, and they presented me with a file that suggested that I led secretly a homosexual lifestyle.
Letourneau came from Halifax for this and invited guests of the government to hear an apology for the way he was treated all those many years ago. But how do you feel about what happened to you?
I think it was a total waste on the part of the government and the part of the Navy to let go someone who had performed well and who had a good career ahead of him. Furthermore, a francophone. The Navy did not have a lot of francophones at that stage. So that was probably my dominant thinking. I was also thinking, okay, what am I going to do now?
So the fact that they are doing this today, could you have imagined all those years ago, 1970 was when it happened, right? That this day would come, that things would change this much?
Never in my wildest dreams. This is just and to have heard the Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau sort of talk about the bedroom of the nation and so on, and now his son about to issue a very broad apology from what we're expecting, and this is just almost miraculous.
And also maybe necessary. Letourneau picked up his life and moved forward. He says others did not fare as well.
Indeed, all Canadians missed out on important contributions you would have made to our society. You were not bad soldiers, sailors, airmen and women. You were not predators, and you were not criminals.
I know you're not a kind of guy that cries, but did you have a moment there where you thought, oh?
He hit it, well, yes, I suppose I did, so it became personal at that point. I thought he was speaking to me specifically. It related to what had happened to me, as someone who was willing to serve the country loyally and competently, who suddenly was being told that he didn't measure up anymore.
Does anything feel different now? Do you feel different at all?
Yeah, I'm just happy that the government has done this. We've been waiting for it for a long time, and from my perspective, what was done today was impressive.
Thousands of federal workers were fired from the 1950s to as late as the 90s as part of what many have come to call the gay purge, a dark chapter in Canada's history.
I think by getting it out in the open and discussing homosexuality is a very, very grave problem indeed. I think
This was not so long ago.
Do you think that they are in any way a danger to our society?
I believe they are.
A time when homosexuality was considered not only to be a criminal act, but a mental illness.
I think they should be locked up.
Do you think that they should be put away? Do you think that they are a danger, a menace?
Yes, definitely.
Changes began slowly, starting in 1967, when Pierre Trudeau, then Justice Minister, introduced massive changes to the criminal code.
There's no place for the state in the bedrooms of the nation, and I think that, what's done in private between adults doesn't concern the criminal code.
Those famous words resonated loudly, and 2 years later, homosexuality was formally decriminalized. But societal change would take much longer.
If a number of homosexuals get control of a particular area of a government department, then to be promoted you have to be a homosexual. It becomes a little society of its own.
With the Cold War looming large, many in the government of the day considered LGBT people as a threat to public security, fearing they could be blackmailed by Soviets into giving up government secrets. People were followed, pictures taken, interrogated about their private lives. An RCMP unit called Section A3 embarked on a mission to suss out and remove all gays from the civil service.
They were showing naked or semi-naked images of women and men.
Even developing a device to test for homosexuality known as the fruit machine.
If the pupil dilated when they were being shown a naked image of someone of the same gender, that this was an indicator that they were actually homosexual.
Not surprisingly, the machine never did work, but the damage was done. The gay purge ruined lives and careers. And it didn't end until 1992. That's when the military began accepting openly gay Canadians. 25 years later, today's apology shows just how far the country has come. But as Catherine Cullen tells us, some say there's still lots of work to do.
It is our collective shame that you were so mistreated.
It was a profound moment, watching the apology in a military armory. Not just for people directly affected. Gemma Hickey never lost a job or got arrested for being transgender, but this still felt personal.
As an activist that's been out in the public, I have received death threats. I've had to involve police. I've been spit on. I've had my property damaged. So for the Prime Minister of Canada to stand up and apologize, I really felt that in my heart today.
But what happens now?
It is my hope that we will look back on today as a turning point. But there is still much more work to do ahead of us.
The apology is a first step. It's a very big step. We've only scratched the surface.
Hickey has fought for gender-neutral birth certificates and says in much of the country that battle continues.
Well, as it stands right now, non-binary individuals are invisible.
We can't forget our past.
People watching the apology in Toronto had other concerns.
I think we really need to focus on the experiences of young people who may not have their parental support for their identities.
I would say one of those big ones for me would be end the blood ban for gay folks.
In the last election, the Liberals called the ban on blood donations from men who had sex with men discriminatory and pledged to end it. 2 years later, the government is still funding new medical research aimed at getting the ban lifted.
Am I happy where we are? No. Do we have more work to do? Yes. And that's why our government stepped up to make sure the funding is there so that we can follow the science and get this work done.
Work to do after absorbing the weight of today's embrace. Catherine Cullen, CBC News, Ottawa.